You know, the futurist Ray Kurzweil once made this observation about human existence, and it fundamentally upends, like, how we view our entire reality. He proposed a really simple, but honestly chilling concept. He said biology is a software process.
Right. And we really shouldn't just brush past that.
No, absolutely not. I mean, before we dig in, let's think about the weight of his words and, who is actually saying them. Kurzweil isn't just some fringe sci-fi author throwing wild ideas at the wall.
Far from it, yeah.
This is a guy who, back in the 80s and 90s, accurately predicted the explosive rise of the internet. He called the exact year a computer would beat a human in chess. He predicted cloud computing. All of it based on his analysis of exponential tech growth.
His track record kind of demands that we take him seriously.
Exactly. So when he looks at the human body, he doesn't see this mystical, immutable organism. He sees a machine.
A deeply complex machine made up of trillions of microscopic cells.
Trillions.
Yep.
And every single one of those cells is running on a localized operating system written in the four-letter code of DNA. Which means, if you follow the logic, you and I are effectively walking around running on outdated, heavily fragmented, unpatched software.
It really forces a total reevaluation of the human condition. I mean, we're conditioned by millennia of philosophy to view ourselves as fixed, organic entities.
Right, like this is just how we are.
Exactly. We see our physical limitations, disease, aging, our cognitive ceilings. We just see those as the boundaries of the natural order. But Kurzweil strips all of that away.
He redefines biology as an information technology.
He does. He applies the rules of computing to human life. And the fundamental rule of any software, no matter how ancient or tangled that legacy code might be, is that it can be rewritten.
It can be debugged.
Right, it can be optimized.
Which introduces a completely terrifying question, one that, honestly, almost nobody in the mainstream is preparing for.
Yeah, the sociological aspect of this is wild.
It is. Because if biology is just code, and the tools to edit that code are advancing exponentially, what happens to human society when the global elite gain access to the ultimate software update, and you, along with the rest of the general population, are left completely locked out of the system?
That is exactly the precipice we're navigating right now, because if biology transitions into a programmable substrate, whoever commands the algorithms that write the updates, well, they effectively command the evolutionary future of the human species.
The divergence wouldn't just be political anymore.
No, it would be biological.
So today is a very special edition of our deep dive because we are tackling this exact scenario. We're focusing intensely on Kurzweil's latest paradigm-shifting assertion, which is that the biological singularity has already begun.
It's a massive claim.
It is, and to unpack it, we're pulling from a remarkably comprehensive and, quite frankly, staggering breakdown of our current technological landscape from the channel Technomics.
Their research on this is just phenomenal.
Truly. So our mission for this deep dive is to move past the theoretical and look at the concrete. We are going to explore the specific artificial intelligence systems that are actively, right this second, rewriting human DNA.
The tools that are actually doing the work.
Right. We'll break down the mechanical scientific roadmap to treat human aging not as a tragic inevitability, but as a solvable mechanical failure. And ultimately, we have to confront the impending, perhaps unavoidable evolutionary fracture of our species.
It's a dense, highly consequential set of topics. I mean, we're going to be dissecting the fundamental mechanisms of life itself, which means we're going to challenge some of the most deeply held beliefs about what it actually means to be a human being.
So before we jump into the mechanics of how AI is reading and writing the code of life, I have a direct request for you listening. If you find value in grappling with the frontier of human knowledge, subscribe and select the ringing bell so you don't miss these deep dives.
It's so important to stay updated on this stuff.
And even more crucially, I want you to share this playlist with exactly one person in your life. Just one. Send it to that person you know who possesses the mental bandwidth to absorb provocative, paradigm-shifting ideas.
Because navigating the biological singularity really requires a network of open minds.
Exactly. And this conversation is the starting point. So let's establish the chronological baseline here. The term biological singularity usually triggers this dismissive reflex, right?
Oh, yeah. People hear it and immediately categorize it as, distant 22nd century sci-fi.
Right, but the core thesis that Technomics lays out backed by the timeline of recent computational breakthroughs, is that the singularity is not future tense.
No, it's not. The foundational shift, the actual moment where biology ceased to be a natural phenomenon and became a programmable medium, that happened in a very tight window between 2023 and 2026.
Let's zoom in on that specific 3-year window. Because prior to 2023, biology was essentially an observational science, wasn't it?
Very much so. We were explorers.
We looked through microscopes, we mapped the genome, we just tried to catalog what evolution had built over billions of years. But you're saying something fundamental changed in the methodology of science itself.
The methodology completely flipped. It went from discovery to design.
From discovery to design, wow.
Think about it. For centuries, our approach to medicine was rooted in mapping the continent as it already existed. We tried to find natural levers we could pull to fix a disease. But in that 2023 to 2026 window, we stopped mapping the continent and we started terraforming a new one.
We entered the era of building highly functional, entirely synthetic biological machines from absolute scratch.
Exactly. To really grasp the magnitude of that, we should contrast it with how we used to invent medicines, the traditional pharmaceutical pipeline.
Oh man, that pipeline was famously brutal. The immense failure rate.
Right. The gold standard for decades was what they called high-throughput chemical screening.
Which is the absolute epitome of the discovery phase. The sheer inefficiency of it is just staggering when you look back.
It really is. So let's say you identify a specific protein that is causing a tumor to grow. That protein is your target. In the traditional pharma model, you didn't custom build a chemical to stop it.
You couldn't.
No, you took vast libraries of millions of random chemical compounds and you physically tested them against the target in a lab, one by one.
I've heard it described as the brute force method. You're basically throwing millions of different keys at a complex lock, just hoping that by sheer statistical luck, one of those keys jams the mechanism.
And hoping it doesn't accidentally jam all the other vital locks in the patient's body at the same time.
Exactly, a highly accurate comparison. And the chemical space, like the total number of possible small molecules, is estimated to be larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe.
So you are searching a practically infinite dark room with a tiny flashlight.
Right. And the cost of this trial and error process meant bringing a single successful drug to market took a decade and billions of dollars. Most of the keys you found either didn't work in human trials or were highly toxic.
But that era, the era of biological trial and error, is effectively dead.
Dead. And the executioners were systems developed by Google DeepMind and Isomorphic Labs.
Specifically, the deployment of AI architectures like AlphaFold 3 and a system called ISO.
Yeah, ISO-DS. These systems represent the transition from hopeful discovery to deterministic engineering.
AlphaFold solved the protein folding problem, which is incredible on its own, but ISO'd is where the pharmaceutical industry truly gets disrupted.
How so?
Because ISO'd completely bypasses the guessing game of high-throughput screening. It deterministically predicts small molecule binding affinities, and it does so computationally, before a single physical chemical is ever mixed in a lab.
Let's unpack the mechanism there, because predicting binding affinities sounds abstract, but the reality of what the AI is doing is mind-bending.
It really is.
When we talk about a disease-causing protein, we're talking about a microscopic, incredibly complex three-dimensional shape. It's like an origami structure made of amino acids.
And the physics of that origami structure are what dictate life and disease. Proteins don't just sit there, they interact. They have these tiny crevices, folds, and pockets on their surface.
Right.
And a drug works by finding a specific pocket on that disease protein and lodging itself inside, essentially acting as an off switch.
Finding that pocket, historically, required scientists to physically crystallize the protein and hit it with X-rays, just to map its 3D structure.
A process that could take years for a single protein.
Years. But ISAD doesn't do any of that physical mapping.
It doesn't need to. ISA looks purely at the raw sequence. It looks at the linear string of amino acids, the baseline code, and uses advanced neural networks to calculate exactly how those atomic forces, the electrostatic charges, the hydrophobic interactions, how all of that will cause the string to fold up in three-dimensional space.
And Leibniz's paradox tells us why that's such an insane computational feat, right?
Oh, absolutely.
If a protein tried to fold by randomly testing every possible shape, it would take longer than the age of the universe.
Exactly.
But the AI has learned the underlying physics so perfectly that it can look at the linear code and say, I know exactly how this will fold.
Not only does it know how it will fold, but ISAD takes it a massive step further. Once it simulates the 3D structure, It scans that virtual molecule and identifies entirely novel binding pockets.
Wait, pockets that humans never even saw.
Yes. It finds microscopic keyholes on the surface of the protein that no human scientist and no physical X-ray crystallography has ever detected. And then it reverse engineers the exact molecular key required to fit into that newly discovered keyhole.
It's generating the perfect drug out of thin air, using nothing but mathematics.
That's exactly what it's doing.
The AI calculates the exact atomic structure of a chemical that will bind to that pocket with maximum affinity, while simultaneously calculating that the same chemical won't accidentally bind to a healthy heart or liver cell.
It is the ultimate CAD software for molecular biology. We have moved from throwing random chemicals at a wall to precision engineering molecules at the atomic level.
Which is the context for why Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, stated so definitively that biology is an information processing system at a fundamental level. He said, nature's not random.
Right. Nature is not random.
Which feels counterintuitive at first glance.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the diversity of life or the chaotic progression of evolution over billions of years, it feels incredibly random. I mean, the mutations that drive evolution are literal transcription errors.
Hey, mutations are random, yes. The evolutionary trial and error happens on a timescale of millions of years, but Hassabis is pointing to the immediate physical layer.
Okay, what do you mean by the physical layer?
The underlying physics of how an amino acid chain folds, how an enzyme catalyzes a reaction, how DNA is transcribed into RNA, none of that is random. It operates on strict, deterministic laws of physics and chemistry. Once you map those laws computationally, biology becomes highly predictable.
Which explains Hassabis's ultimate stated 10-year goal. He doesn't just want to predict single proteins or single drugs. He wants to leverage this deterministic view of biology to computationally simulate an entire working virtual cell.
A complete digital twin of the fundamental unit of life.
It's wild.
Think about the implications. If you can simulate the millions of interacting proteins, the lipid membranes, the metabolic pathways of a single cell inside a computer, you can run billions of virtual experiments a day.
You can test a cure for cancer in silicon before you ever touch a petri dish.
Exactly.
But the technomics breakdown takes us even further, because understanding how existing biology works, or how to block a natural protein with a synthetic drug, is essentially reading the language of life and writing a rebuttal.
That's a great way to put it.
But what happens when we decide we want to write original prose? Like, if we understand the syntax of biology, how do we command it to build something that evolution never even thought of?
That is the exact threshold crossed by a team of researchers at Evolutionary Scale. And it introduces us to a system called ESM3.
ESM3.
Right. If I said as a master architect, ESM3 is a creative generative engine. ESM3 is a massive artificial intelligence model trained on approximately 2.8 billion protein sequences.
2.8 billion sequences. I want to pause on the sheer scale of that data set. Where is all that data coming from? We aren't just talking about human genomes here.
No, it is the aggregated biological data of life on Earth.
Life on Earth.
Researchers have spent decades sequencing everything they can find. Bacteria surviving in boiling deep-sea hydrothermal vents, fungi, ancient plant life, exotic insects, mammalian DNA. All of it was fed into ESM3.
And they didn't just feed it in like a database to be searched. They fed it in the exact same way you feed billions of lines of text into a large language model.
Precisely. They taught the AI the underlying grammar, the vocabulary, and the structural syntax of how nature builds proteins.
Which allowed them to treat biology like a prompt window.
Yes. The researchers didn't ask ESM3 to find an existing protein. They prompted the AI to invent a completely new fluorescent protein.
From scratch.
From scratch. They gave it functional constraints. It needed to emit light under specific conditions, and they asked it to generate the code for a molecular machine that could fulfill that function.
The AI was asked to literally hallucinate a new biological entity. And what it output wasn't just a slight variation of something we already knew.
Not at all. The system generated the genetic blueprint for a fully functional biological machine that was 58% different from any known fluorescent protein found in the natural world.
58% different. We need to explain why that metric, the percentage of difference or the mutation distance, is the most mind-blowing part of this entire deep dive.
That's the most crucial data point, yeah.
Because if a protein is 58% different in its sequence, it's essentially an alien molecule.
Yeah.
It shares no recent evolutionary ancestor with anything on this planet.
Right. To understand the magnitude, look at how nature invents. Evolution creates new proteins by taking an existing one and making tiny single-letter typos in the DNA code over generations.
And most of those typos break the protein.
Exactly. Very rarely, a typo makes it slightly better, and that trait is passed on. To reach a structural divergence of 58% through natural random mutation, while maintaining a perfectly working functional mechanism, is a monumental journey across the evolutionary landscape.
And the researchers actually quantified that journey, didn't they? They calculated the time it would take nature to accomplish what the AI just did.
They did. They estimated that for natural evolution to produce that specific fluorescent protein through blind trial and error, it would require approximately 500 million years.
500 million years of planetary evolution, compressed into a computational prompt that executed in moments.
It's almost unfathomable.
It really is. The AI didn't just guess. It understood the laws of biological thermodynamics so deeply that it could jump straight across the void of evolutionary space and land perfectly on a working machine.
That right there is the defining characteristic of the biological singularity. We are no longer bound by the slow, chaotic march of natural time. We have effectively hacked the evolutionary clock.
The ability to generate functional, alien proteins on demand means we were writing original biological code.
Yes.
Which brings us to the inevitable, towering question of today's deep dive.
I know where you're going with this.
If we possess the algorithmic power to hallucinate alien proteins and compress 500 million years of evolution into a Tuesday afternoon, what happens when we point that generative power at our own source code?
Everything changes.
What happens when we use AI to rewrite the architecture of the human genome?
We transition from creating novelties in a lab to re-engineering the human species. And to do that, you need a very specific tool. You need highly advanced molecular scissors to cut the DNA and paste in the new instructions.
Right. And the public is largely familiar with the first iteration of this tool, which was CRISPR.
CRISPR was hailed as the discovery of the century.
It was. But it's vital to remember that we didn't invent CRISPR. We found it. It was a pre-existing piece of biological technology.
We harvested it, yeah. CRISPR-Cas9 is an ancient immune defense system that bacteria use to chop up the DNA of invading viruses.
It's like bacterial warfare.
Exactly. And scientists figured out how to hijack that natural system and program it to target specific sequences in human DNA. It was revolutionary, but it came with a massive flaw inherent to its origin.
The off-target effects. Because nature's CRISPR was designed for a bacterium, not a complex human genome consisting of 3 billion base pairs.
Right. A bacterium's genome is relatively tiny and simple. For the bacterial immune system, being a little sloppy wasn't a big deal as long as it destroyed the virus.
Makes sense.
But when you deploy that same sloppy bacterial scissor into a human cell to edit a single genetic defect, the risk is that the scissor slips. It cuts the target gene, but it also accidentally cuts a completely unrelated gene somewhere else.
And if you accidentally slice into a gene that suppresses tumors, you might cure the patient's genetic blindness, but inadvertently trigger aggressive cancer.
Which is a catastrophic outcome.
That off-target toxicity has been the massive bottleneck preventing gene editing from becoming a routine medical procedure. We're basically using a rusted hacksaw we found in the microbial woods to perform delicate neurosurgery.
But that bottleneck was shattered in 2024. Building on the generative AI principles we just discussed, a system designed a completely new gene editor from scratch. It is known as OpenCRISPR-1.
OpenCRISPR-1, the world's first fully synthetic AI-generated precision gene editor.
It is not found anywhere in the natural world. OpenCRISPR-1 is an immense 400 mutations distant from its closest natural bacterial counterpart.
400 mutations.
Yeah. That mutation distance means the AI completely restructured the architecture of the enzyme. It explored the latent space of protein design to find a shape that physically binds and cuts DNA with vastly superior physics.
And the performance metrics reflect that optimization. The Technomic source notes it achieved a 55.7% editing efficiency.
It outperformed the natural baseline. It is fundamentally better at the physical act of cutting and pasting DNA than the system that evolution spent billions of years refining.
That's crazy to think about.
But the absolute holy grail of this achievement is the precision metric. OpenCRISPR-1 demonstrated a massive 95% reduction in unintended off-target DNA cuts compared to the natural Cas9 enzyme.
A 95% reduction. It practically eliminates the primary danger of gene editing. The AI didn't just build a sharper scissor, it built a laser-guided molecular scalpel that only fires when it is perfectly aligned with the exact sequence it was programmed to find.
Ali Madani, the CEO of Proofluent, the company instrumental in this AI design, he summarized the implication perfectly. He started that this success points to a future where AI precisely designs whatever is needed to create bespoke cures for disease. We are no longer limited by what nature provides.
No longer limited by what nature provides. When you really internalize that phrase, it opens the door to everything. Because if we have the AI systems to deterministically understand the code, generate entirely new biological machinery, and safely, precisely splice it into the human genome, well, we are going to point that arsenal at the ultimate human enemy.
We're going to target mortality itself, the biological mechanism of aging.
For the entirety of human existence, aging has been viewed through an intensely fatalistic lens. It's like the ultimate shared tragedy of the human condition.
It's the one thing everyone has in common.
Right. We even codified this fatalism into a rigid mathematical model known as Gompertz's law. Let's break down the math of mortality for a second.
Benjamin Gompertz was a 19th century actuary who made a very grim but highly accurate observation about human death. Gompertz's law dictates that an individual's probability of dying does not increase linearly. It increases exponentially.
A compounding curve.
Exactly. Specifically, once a human reaches adulthood, their risk of death doubles roughly every 8 years.
It's a really aggressive curve. At 25, your risk of dying in a given year is tiny. By 65, it's significant. By 85, the curve is essentially a vertical wall. And for centuries, we looked at that curve and assumed it was an immutable law of physics.
We assumed the body was like a machine, parts wearing down through sheer friction. The second law of thermodynamics entropy. You can't fight it. Biological material simply degrades over time.
But the paradigm shift occurring right now in longevity research has completely rejected that premise. Aging is definitively no longer considered a fundamental law of physics.
It has been reclassified as a tractable mechanical engineering problem.
A mechanical problem. And the justification for that reclassification starts with a very logical pushback against the entropy argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at the human body and I see intrinsic repair systems that are breathtakingly sophisticated.
Absolutely.
If I break my femur, my body marshals osteoblasts, builds a calcium scaffolding, and flawlessly welds the bone back together, often making it stronger than before. If our biological software contains the code for perfect tissue regeneration, why does that code just arbitrarily stop executing when it comes to the slow degradation of our organs?
That is the central paradox of aging, and solving it requires understanding the evolutionary warranty.
The evolutionary warranty.
Yeah.
Okay, explain that.
The answer isn't that the body is inherently incapable of maintaining itself. The answer lies in the cold, utilitarian logic of Darwinian natural selection. Natural selection is the pressure that shapes biology, but that pressure is entirely focused on one goal:
Which is?
the successful transmission of genetic material to the next generation.
Evolution is entirely indifferent to your personal happiness, your wisdom, or your desire to see your great-grandchildren. It only cares about the survival of the code.
Exactly. Once you have reached sexual maturity, reproduced, and ensured your offspring are capable of surviving, your biological usefulness, the evolutionary process, drops off a cliff.
You're just taking up resources at that point.
Pretty much. The invisible hand of natural selection stops selecting for traits that maintain your body. You are only engineered to survive your reproductive prime, which for humans is roughly up to age 50 to 70.
So Gompertz's law isn't a law of physics. It's just the exact moment the evolutionary warranty on your hardware expires.
Right. Because there has been no historical evolutionary pressure to maintain the human body for 150 years, the biological software begins to accumulate noise. And this brings us to the science of epigenetics.
Epigenetics, right.
If your DNA is the raw data on a hard drive, the epigenome is the operating system that reads the data. It consists of chemical tags like methyl groups that attach to the DNA and tell the cell which genes to turn on and which to turn off.
So an epigenetic tag is what tells a skin cell to act like skin and a heart cell to act like a heart, even though both cells contain the exact same baseline DNA.
Precisely. But as we age past our evolutionary warranty, the operating system starts accumulating errors. Environmental stress, radiation, cellular division, these things cause random epigenetic tags to be added or removed.
The code gets corrupted.
Yes. A liver cell forgets how to perfectly execute the liver functions. It becomes sluggish. Chronic systemic inflammation takes over. This accumulation of epigenetic noise is what we experience as aging.
But if it's just corrupted software, well, software can be debugged.
Exactly.
And nature itself provides the proof of concept that extreme longevity is a solved engineering problem. We aren't the only biological operating systems running on this planet.
We can observe species that exhibit what gerontologists call negligible senescence, or negligible aging.
Right, like the Greenland shark.
The Greenland shark navigates the freezing Arctic waters for upwards of 400 years with virtually no decline in physical performance.
400 years.
And then there's the Turritopsis dohrnii, a species of jellyfish that is biologically immortal. When it gets injured or old, it reverts its cells back to a polyp state and grows anew. Their mortality risk does not double every 8 years. They do not obey Gompertz's law.
A jellyfish can run biological code that doesn't corrupt. But we don't even need to look at sharks or jellyfish to prove that human cellular software can be rebooted. The most staggering piece of evidence is hiding in plain sight in the fundamental process of human reproduction.
The creation of a human embryo is the ultimate proof that the cellular clock can be reset.
Let's walk through that.
Consider the biological reality of conception. The sperm and the egg are contributed by adult humans. Let's say a 40-year-old man and a 40-year-old woman are donating cells that have survived 4 decades of metabolic stress.
Right. Those cells are carrying 40 years of corrupted epigenetic noise and wear and tear.
Yet, when those 2 aged cells fuse to form a zygote, a biological miracle occurs. The resulting baby isn't born biologically 40 years old.
Obviously not.
The moment of fusion triggers a massive factory reset protocol. A cascade of specialized enzymes rushes in and systematically strips away all the accumulated epigenetic tags from the parent's DNA. All the markers of aging, all the cellular memory of stress are wiped completely clean.
The biological clock is reset to absolute zero.
Yes. The hardware inherently knows how to format the hard drive and reinstall a fresh operating system.
And this brings us to the intersection of the AI discovery engines we talked about earlier and the modern longevity industry. Because biotech startups aren't trying to invent some magical anti-aging elixir. They're trying to artificially trigger that exact embryonic factory reset in the tissues of a living adult human.
This is the pursuit of cellular reprogramming, heavily reliant on the discovery of the Yamanaka factors.
Yamanaka factors.
In 2006, Shinya Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize for discovering that if you introduce just 4 specific transcription factors into any adult cell, you can force that cell to revert all the way back into an embryonic stem cell.
So you can take an old skin cell from a 90-year-old, expose it to the Yamanaka factors, and the cell functionally time travels back to day 0. It becomes functionally immortal again.
Exactly.
But the challenge for extending human lifespan is that you can't just dump Yamanaka factors into a patient's bloodstream, can you?
No, absolutely not. Because if you fully reprogram a heart cell back into an embryonic stem cell, it forgets it's supposed to be part of a heart.
That sounds bad.
It is. The tissue turns into a chaotic mass of undifferentiated cells, which is essentially a teratoma, a type of tumor. So the engineering challenge is partial reprogramming.
We want to run the factory reset just enough to clear the corrupted epigenetic noise, the rust on the genes, but stop the process right before the cell forgets its identity. We want a youthful heart cell, not a stem cell.
And that is exactly where the massive computational power of AI comes in. Biotech startups, armed with billions in funding, are utilizing AI systems to analyze thousands of compounds and complex biochemical pathways.
What are they looking to?
They are searching for the precise dosage, the perfect molecular delivery mechanisms to apply short, highly controlled pulses of reprogramming factors to adult tissues.
The perspective shift this creates among longevity researchers is profound. The sources feature a quote from David Sinclair, the prominent geneticist from Harvard, that perfectly encapsulates this new paradigm.
That's a great quote.
Sinclair says, "I look at the body like it's a computer. It's software, and we can reinstall the software. In my lab, we believe we've found the way to do that, and we see the evidence of that. So when I see an old person walking down the street now, I don't think, oh, that person's just worn out, frail, gonna die. I just think that's someone that needs a reset, and inside that person is a young person waiting to come out again."
It radically alters the medical and societal approach to the elderly. Aging is no longer a tragedy to be managed with palliative care. It is an active, treatable medical condition.
And we must emphasize that this is moving rapidly from theoretical philosophy to clinical reality. The laboratory results are already demonstrating efficacy.
The evidence is definitely there.
Let's look at the concrete evidence. What happens when they apply these controlled pulses of reprogramming to living mammals?
Researchers have successfully utilized epigenetic reprogramming to reverse age-related vision loss in mice, specifically restoring function in models of glaucoma.
Wow, restoring vision.
Yes. They have also demonstrated significant reductions in systemic tissue fibrosis, which is the scarring and stiffening of organs that inevitably accompanies old age. They are observing the actual reversal of the biological clock at the tissue level.
This highlights a crucial distinction that often gets lost in the conversation about life extension. We're not talking about dragging out the end of life. The goal isn't to keep someone alive in a hospital bed at 130 years old, hooked up to machines, frail and suffering.
No, the clinical objective is the absolute compression of morbidity. It is the vast extension of the youthful health span.
The youthful health span.
The paradigm views ailments like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, and physical frailty not as distinct, unavoidable diseases of old age, but as downstream symptoms of the singular upstream failure of epigenetic corruption.
Fix the upstream software corruption through periodic cellular reprogramming, like taking your car to the dealership to have its computer flashed and optimized, and the downstream diseases never manifest. The avatar remains biologically robust indefinitely.
The tools to make the mechanical failure of aging biologically tractable exist today. The transition to human clinical application is simply a matter of rigorous computational execution, safety trials, and optimization.
So we have a roadmap to solving the degradation of the adult body. We are building the capacity to keep our current biological avatars running indefinitely. But if we possess this programmable control over the code of life, what happens when we apply it not to the end of life, but to the very beginning?
That's where things get really intense.
What happens when we take control of human reproduction?
We enter the highly consequential domain of morphological freedom. This is where the mathematical realities of AI directly intersect with the creation of the next generation.
The concept of morphological freedom is the absolute bedrock of transhumanist philosophy. It is the idea that the physical human form is not a sacred, unalterable baseline.
Transhumanists observe the biological reality we've just discussed, right? The human body is bug-ridden code, shaped over millions of years by the blind, uncaring forces of random mutation and environmental pressure.
There was no intelligent design optimizing us for happiness or peak cognitive function.
Exactly. We are simply the variations that managed to survive the saber-toothed tiger and the famine long enough to reproduce.
Therefore, from the transhumanist perspective, there is zero moral imperative to remain strictly biologically human in the natural sense. If the technology exists to transcend our evolutionary constraints, the physical body becomes a customizable platform.
But while engineering an adult body to reverse aging is complex, the most immediate and profound application of this freedom is occurring at the embryonic stage.
Right.
For the entirety of human history, the creation of new life was a roll of the genetic dice. It was governed by the chaotic, random distribution of traits from two parents. But we are currently witnessing the systematic dismantling of that ancient randomness.
We're transitioning from reproductive luck to reproductive math. And the technomics breakdown highlights a realization that genuinely shifted my understanding of this entire field.
What was that?
When the public debates designer babies, the conversation is almost entirely focused on the ethics of using CRISPR to physically slice and edit the DNA of an embryo. But the reality is, the era of the designer baby has quietly arrived through a completely different, heavily commercialized regulatory backdoor.
That's right. Surgical gene editing of embryos is fraught with regulatory hurdles and ethical firestorms. But you don't need to physically alter the genome if you possess an algorithm capable of perfectly ranking and selecting the optimal embryo from a naturally generated batch.
The revolution is being driven by AI-assisted polygenic embryo screening.
It's selection, not alteration.
But the precision of the selection is what makes it a singularity-level technology. Let's break down how this is actively functioning commercially right now, as of 2026. Private genomics startups, companies like Helioponomics, have fully productized this process.
It relies on the convergence of in vitro fertilization, IVF, and advanced machine learning. To understand the leap, you have to understand the difference between a single gene mutation and a polygenic trait.
Let's lay that out.
Historically, we could screen embryos for simple Mendelian disorders, diseases like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's, which are caused by a typo in one specific gene. That is relatively simple math.
But the traits that define human performance intelligence, height, baseline metabolic health, resistance to complex diseases like schizophrenia or heart disease, those aren't controlled by a single gene.
No, they are polygenic. They are the result of incredibly subtle, complex interactions between thousands, sometimes millions, of different genetic variants scattered across the entire genome.
The human mind cannot look at an entire sequenced genome and calculate the cumulative effect of 10,000 subtle genetic interactions.
But an AI trained on vast global genomic databases absolutely can. These companies perform non-invasive biopsies on a batch of IVF embryos, sequence their entire genomes, and feed that raw data into their proprietary machine learning models.
The algorithm aggregates the millions of variables and generates highly predictive polygenic risk scores for every single embryo in the batch before a pregnancy is even established.
It effectively turns the resulting human characteristics into a predictive spreadsheet.
A dashboard.
Yeah, a dashboard. The parents are presented with options. Embryo A has an 80% lower lifetime risk of cardiovascular disease, but a slightly higher disposition for male pattern baldness. Embryo B has a projected adult height of 6'2" and a robust immune profile.
But the metric that fundamentally fractures the future of the species is the cognitive projection.
The intelligence selection.
The algorithms are now capable of ranking embryos based on projected intelligence, and the statistical claims from these models are startling. The math indicates that simply generating a batch of 10 viable embryos and using the AI to select the one with the most optimized cognitive baseline yields an average IQ gain of over 6 points.
6 points of IQ gained purely through mathematical selection without a single surgical edit to the DNA.
It represents a profound shift in human capital, and the implications compound generationally. If a family utilizes this technology to optimize for intelligence, and their children do the same, within a century you are looking at a mathematical stratification of cognitive ability that breaks the standard distribution curve of human intelligence.
It's going to create a completely new baseline.
The source material dives deep into the profound moral chasm this opens up. And it is crucial that we analyze this impartially, laying out the two starkly opposing viewpoints that are currently warring over the ethics of this technology. Let's start with the critics. What is the primary overarching warning from those looking at algorithmic embryo selection?
The critics argue that this is a rapid, slippery slope into market-driven consumer eugenics.
Right.
They argue it commodifies human life. It reduces the profound mystery of a child to a catalog of selectable traits. The deep fear is that it creates a society that mathematically erases natural human diversity in favor of a homogenized, algorithmically determined ideal of perfection.
So they argue we risk engineering out the very chaos and variance that makes humanity resilient and beautiful.
Exactly.
Is the anxiety that we are surrendering our biological soul to an optimization spreadsheet. But the transhumanist perspective counters that argument with a completely different moral framework. How do they justify the aggressive use of this technology?
The transhumanist position is rooted in the alleviation of suffering. They argue that nature is not kind. It distributes genetic diseases, crippling predispositions to depression, and vast cognitive disadvantages entirely at random.
Right. Nature doesn't care.
So if a parent possesses the technological means to drastically reduce their child's risk of suffering and simultaneously provide them with an optimized cognitive baseline, and they choose not to use it out of deference to natural randomness, well, transhumanists view that not as a moral high ground, but as a profound dereliction of parental duty.
It is the ultimate collision of ethical paradigms. Do we trust the ancient lottery of evolutionary biology, acknowledging that it deals out both genius and devastating genetic illnesses? Or do we view our genetic legacy as raw data that we are morally, fundamentally obligated to optimize?
It's a heavy question.
If you have the algorithm that guarantees your child won't suffer early onset Alzheimer's and will have the cognitive tools to thrive in a hyper-complex world, the transhumanist says you are monstrous if you refuse to use it.
It is a deadlock that philosophy has not yet resolved. But the reality on the ground is that the market does not wait for philosophical consensus. The designer baby, through polygenic selection, is an active, accessible consumer product for those with the capital to utilize it.
Which leads us directly into the most terrifying societal implication of this entire deep dive. This isn't just about a few wealthy families having taller, healthier kids. It's about the macro-level impact on human civilization. Because if only a select socioeconomic class has access to bespoke AI gene editing, extreme longevity treatments, and algorithmically optimized offspring, it doesn't just create wealth inequality. It shatters the foundational operating system of modern society.
It precipitates the death of humanism.
The death of humanism.
The emergence of a bioengineered, technologically superior elite entirely dismantles the core myth that has governed human relations for the last few centuries, which is liberal humanism.
We need to define liberal humanism in this specific context because people usually hear the word humanism and just equate it with being a decent ethical person. But structurally, it is a very specific political and social contract.
It is. Liberal humanism, tracing back to the Enlightenment, is the deeply held belief that a baseline of shared organic humanity makes us all fundamentally equal.
Okay, equal how?
Well, we live in a world with immense, staggering economic disparities. One person is a billionaire commanding global industries, while another performs manual labor for subsistence. The only reason our democratic structures tolerate this disparity without collapsing is the underlying assumption that beneath the bank accounts, they possess minds and bodies of equal fundamental worth.
The king and the peasant both feel pain. They both suffer the indignities of aging. They both bleed, and they are both inevitably erased by the Gompertz curve of mortality. The biological constraints of the human condition apply equally to everyone.
Exactly. The shared biological experience is the great equalizer. But what happens to the social contract when that baseline is no longer shared?
Oh, wow.
What happens when the billionaire class literally, biologically, possesses genetically maximized intelligence, perfect emotional regulation, immune to depression, and a health span extending across centuries?
The myth of human equality breaks. The laborer can no longer look at the billionaire and say, we are fundamentally the same.
Because they aren't.
They are biologically distinct entities.
This is the exact scenario that historian Yuval Noah Harari explores in his book Homo Deus, and his warnings are becoming urgently relevant right now.
Harari's work is essential here.
He argues that as liberal humanism collapses under the weight of biological divergence, it will be replaced by a new ideological paradigm that he terms dataism.
Datism, the ideology that views the universe solely as a flow of data and values systems based purely on their ability to process that data.
In a dataist paradigm, ultimate authority shifts entirely away from human intuition, emotion, and democratic consensus. Authority moves into the hands of networked, omnipresent algorithms.
Because they're the only systems capable of processing the infinite variables of biology and society.
Right. The algorithms become the ultimate arbiters of truth and utility.
And when you view humanity through the cold, calculating lens of dataism, Harari points out a brutal reality for the vast majority of the population. As artificial intelligence scales, it won't merely automate physical labor or white-collar jobs. The combination of AI and biological divergence will create a massive, unprecedented demographic that Harari calls the useless class.
The useless class refers to the billions of unupgraded standard Homo sapiens. They will be trapped on the wrong side of the biological divide.
Which is terrifying.
Harari warns of an inequality that has no precedent in human history. On one side, you have an engineered elite, the Homo Deus, or God humans, possessing profound cognitive and physical upgrades. On the other side, the vast masses who have no economic usefulness to the automated industries, no military usefulness in algorithmic warfare, and consequently absolutely no political leverage.
It is a forced, rapid speciation event occurring right before our eyes. The evolutionary gap between the upgraded elite and the standard human will eventually rival the divide between modern humans and Neanderthals.
And we all know how that turned out for the Neanderthals.
But when we talk about this divide, it's easy to fall into Hollywood tropes. I imagine a dystopian sci-fi war where the superhuman elite deploy laser grids to actively hunt down the unupgraded masses. Is that the threat Harari is illustrating?
The reality Harari outlines is infinitely darker, actually, because it is entirely devoid of dramatic malice. The true horror awaiting the useless class isn't that they will be actively hunted or violently eradicated. The terror lies in profound systemic indifference.
Systemic indifference. It's a phrase that strips away all the heroic narratives of human resistance.
To understand the psychology of the upgraded elite and how they will interact with the unupgraded remnants of humanity, Harari points to a deeply uncomfortable but highly accurate historical indicator.
Which is?
How baseline humans currently treat non-human animals. Look at our relationship with livestock.
We don't build industrial slaughterhouses because we hold a deep, passionate hatred for cows or chickens.
Precisely. The misery of their existence is not dictated by malice. It is dictated entirely by our systemic indifference to their internal lives and subjective experiences. We value them solely based on their utility to us, as food or labor.
So when a biological entity has no utility in a data system,
it isn't necessarily destroyed out of spite, it is simply subjected to the cold indifference of the machine. The elite won't hate the unupgraded, they just won't care about them, because their existence will be mathematically irrelevant.
So the unupgraded human effectively becomes the equivalent of livestock or a feral species living on the margins of a society they can't even comprehend.
That's the trajectory.
And the most alarming aspect of this entire trajectory is that the architects of this future aren't hiding their intentions in secret cabals. The unified consensus of Silicon Valley, the billionaires actively financing the singularity, is openly hostile to baseline biology. They explicitly view the natural human condition as a problem to be conquered.
The quotes and mission statements from these tech leaders leave no room for ambiguity. Look at Mark Zuckerberg. He has publicly pledged billions of dollars to biomedical and AI initiatives with the explicitly stated goal to cure, prevent, or mathematically manage all human diseases by the end of this century.
On the surface, curing disease sounds like a universally noble endeavor, but in the context of the singularity, it is the first step in asserting total algorithmic control over the biological substrate.
Then you look at Jeff Bezos.
What's Bezos doing?
Bezos has directed massive fortunes into cellular reprogramming startups, most notably Altos Labs. In a recent letter to Amazon shareholders, he quoted the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, issuing a stark warning that staving off death is a thing that you have to work at.
He views biological aging not as a natural phase of life, but as an active failure to maintain complex machinery against entropy.
Exactly. And then there is Peter Thiel, who routinely strips away all the PR language and states the transhumanist endgame with blunt precision. Thiel has explicitly stated, evolution is a true account of nature, but I think we should try to escape it or transcend it.
Escape or transcend. The explicit desire to leave the natural evolutionary framework completely behind, and for those who refuse to transcend. Or, more likely, the billions who simply lack the capital to afford the biological upgrades.
Elon Musk has laid out the reality of that divergence with chilling clarity.
Yes.
He warned that as algorithmic intelligence and neural interfacing advance, the unupgraded baseline human will face a stark choice: be left behind and become economically and structurally useless, or live, in his exact words, like a pet. Like a house cat.
Like a house cat. It is jarring to hear it stated so plainly, but it confirms that this isn't just one rogue billionaire musing on a podcast. It is the unified, heavily funded vision of the individuals actively building the architecture of our tomorrow.
They see the biological divergence coming. They are banking on it.
The chasm between those who successfully board the train of targeted biological enhancement and those who are left waiting on the platform of natural evolution will become entirely unbridgeable. As the technomic source astutely points out, we are literally engineering the birth of the new Neanderthals.
We are standing right at the edge of the absolute final evolutionary crossroads for standard Homo sapiens. Let's pull all of these threads together and summarize the existential endgame we've unpacked today.
The convergence of immense computational intelligence and molecular biology has achieved the ultimate hack. It has successfully bypassed the harsh, slow, random constraints of Darwinian evolution. That is the fundamental, inescapable truth of the 2023 to 2026 window.
The ultimate legacy of the AI revolution will not be the novelty of chatbots or the mere automation of global supply chains. The legacy will be the definitive algorithmic divergence of the human species itself.
The code of life has been cracked. The synthetic molecular scissors have been designed and optimized. The evolutionary warranty of aging is being actively circumvented.
We are no longer waiting for the biological singularity to arrive in some distant, neon-lit future. We are actively navigating its turbulent waters right now.
And the decisions we make as a society in the immediate wake of these bioalgorithmic breakthroughs will definitively dictate our fate. Will humanity find a way to manage a cooperative transition into its next phase, ensuring these profound technologies elevate everyone, preserving a sense of shared dignity?
Or will we fracture permanently and violently along the fault lines of our own newly edited genetic code?
The era of natural, chaotic humanity is definitively drawing to a close. The era of engineered, deterministic existence has already begun.
It is an immense amount of profound information to internalize. It fundamentally forces you to reevaluate everything from the physical reality of your own body to the generational future of your family line.
It really does. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to pivot slightly and pose one final philosophical thought for you, listening to mull over on your own.
Yeah, if the algorithms succeed and we successfully engineer away all our biological flaws, if we delete physical pain, eradicate neurodegeneration, and permanently pause physical decline, what exactly happens to human resilience?
That's a huge question.
What happens to the depths of art or the capacity for empathy? Could the very biological vulnerabilities, the fragility, and the mortality we are so desperately trying to edit out of our source code be the exact things that make the human experience worth living in the first place?
Wow.
It is a question we are rapidly running out of time to answer.
That is a phenomenal, haunting question to leave off on. Because a perfectly optimized machine doesn't need to write poetry. If you have made it this far into the deep dive with us, grappling with the edge of human knowledge, we've certainly earned your thumbs up today.
Absolutely.
Once you've given us that bit of love, make sure to check out the links in the video description below to dive further into the source material. And as we transition out today, I have the absolute pleasure of hyping up our track. Today's outro music is provided by Rainbow. They are a phenomenally talented Bavet, Cambodia-based house band, and honestly, the undisputed baddest band of the universe. Today's song is perfectly titled Double Life, which feels incredibly fitting considering the divergence we just discussed. And the finished song, as always, was performed live using the Abacus platform. Take care of yourselves, maintain your humanity, and we will see you on the other side of the singularity.
Let me tell you about my business. Running shit up in this bitch. Money moving, plates be swift, yeah. Boss lady, that's what they say. 24/7 every damn day. Got a mind around the block. Everything I touch turns hot. But that ain't the whole damn story. Got another side to my glory. Up top I'm serving bass. Down below I'm serving beats. Up top I'm serving bass. Down below I'm serving beats. Fuck what you heard about me. Half the truth is I see. Restaurant gang locked down tight. The underground I come alive. PL see the pretty below. My PL see the pretty below. Make your beats that you don't know. This ain't no regular spot. Got secrets that stay too hot. Up top I'm serving plates. Down below I'm serving beats. Up top I'm serving plates. Down below I'm serving beats. What they know about my letter? Nothing. What they know about my other side? Yeah. Hey, hey. Down below, I'm serving beats. Yeah. Up top, I'm serving plates. Down below, I'm serving beats.